Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of Adventurers University. Today, we're going to dive right back into our lore building series and discuss ways to implement and introduce lore to your audience, whether it be players or readers. Creating lore in your world can be fun, exciting. You have this world, all this story, and you want your audience to know about it, to learn about it. You want them to feel the same passion that you do. But if you just throw it at them, very often it falls flat and they just feel like you're force feeding them a bunch of information. So, what do you do to fix that? The first and perhaps most straightforward thing to do when it comes to introducing lore to your audience is to not introduce it. Seems a little contradictory, but just throwing a bunch of information at people can be a lot. Often seen as boring, dull, just throwing words, etc. Seen as bad writing or bad storytelling, either one. So sometimes the best approach is to not do so, at least right off the bat. This is especially true in the role-playing side of things because the players are interacting with the story, so you can get a gauge of what they're interested in as you go. As they're interacting, you'll learn what they want to know about, and then you can gauge what to tell them. When writing, you can still do this kind of thing. You can uh, decide what needs to be said, what is relevant to the story. And now that we've cut out a lot of the exposition and lore dumping, we're going to actually present some of the actually important information, stuff that we know that players or readers need to know. And we can do this one way by introducing it through other people, one person telling it to another. Now, this can be done as a parent telling a story to a child, or a caretaker, or stranger, storytelling. One example of this could be it's not really lore, but Princess and the Frog. We start with the mother telling a story to the younger uh, protagonist and her friend. And there are so many other stories that start this way with the protagonist hearing about a legend or something or other, hearing about the backstory of something. And this is a believable way to have things introduced, and an interesting way usually because you're getting the reactions. And frequently we get a contrast right away of how, like, this is the ideal, this is the reality, or this is the legend, this is the present. Things like that. There are opposites that are portrayed to distinguish the differences, why it's significant to the story and to the people. In a role-playing game, it can be the quest giver that tells the legend or the lore, etc., relevant to the quest. You come to me seeking riches. Have you heard the tale of the sunken city, where untold wealth lays beneath the waves, guarded by its cursed former occupants and monstrous new residents? In situations like this, the lore is very relevant, at least parts of the lore, very relevant to the quest, the way that the motivation. If it's just for wealth, then you tell things about the money and the things that are guarding the wealth. And that will sometimes lead to tales about the original occupants. For example, cursed residents. How did they get cursed? Is it something I can get? No, it's because of something that they did specifically. So you learn a little bit about them. And it's a way of kind of sneaking lore in to your players, and you can do this with readers too, depending on the type of story that you're giving, on on the different things about this location. Next tip is to have little snippets. Instead of doing it in one big story of what it is, give just little details here and there, have it kind of hinted at. It'll have an element of mystery that way. Going back to this sunken city, let's say our group of intrepid adventurers, whether it's players or the main characters of a book that you're writing, they enter the sunken city. They've fought off a couple monsters, or maybe not yet, but they're wandering through some of uh, the subterranean, underwater, whatever tunnels, and there are murals faded from time, damage from the seawater or fresh water, whatever, I don't know. Uh, you describe the setting and you learn about some of the past through just little snippets. There is a uh, depiction here of a brass bull, uh, and then that becomes a theme here and there. You see bulls everywhere. Is this going to be kind of like the Minotaur and the maze? Is it going to be like how people believe uh, I can't remember the name of the place right now, the place where the Minotaur lived, but that place, it was an actual location which people believe they have unearthed, where they worshipped bulls to a degree. They learned this from the various archaeological digs that they've unearthed from this island. That's the kind of stuff that you can unearth and discover as you're exploring. Just here and there, a bit of how the daily life was. Over here, there's a setup that is maybe frozen in time somehow. For example, Critical Role does a really intriguing job of doing something like this with Aeor. I don't want to give too much spoilers to anything if you haven't seen season 2 yet, but there is at one point a scene where it is magically preserved because of a reason, and they're able to witness the last moments of a situation. It could also be entombed somehow. Maybe it is glass for some reason, locked in glass. Uh, they are buried in sand. It was superheated, so you see the skeletal forms locked in place. Alternatively, it could just be a room which hasn't been touched. You are able to enter. A gush of air comes out as a natural seal is broken from the erosion and the cataclysm. You enter, water spills in through between your feet, and you see a number of chairs scooch past, and you see a set table with rotted food, or food that immediately deteriorates as it's exposed to the fresh air. And you can see what it would have been like in this space in the time that it was still uh, in its heyday. So just little snippets here and there adds a little flavor to makes it feel alive and adds more mystery. You can add colors. You can give it aesthetics, like the bowl, if you want to use that, or some other animal. Something that they've worshipped was a big part of their culture. Just hinting at what is to come, things that were important to the society. Things like that can enrich the environment, making it more interesting, and secretly be explaining your lore. Even though you're not saying, they did this, they did that, they did this, they did that, you're presenting it in a way that they can relate to, is interesting to discover, and is in small, bite-sized amounts so that it's not too much at once. This can also be called the show don't tell method, because it's the elements of the environment, it's the things that they encounter. They're learning the lore as they come across it. It's not just someone telling them about it, they're experiencing it, they're seeing it, they're witnessing it themselves, and it's coming to life as they discover each bit and piece. Another way that you can get this information to your players or readers is that you can have one of the people already know it. For example, it could be part of the backstory or a history check for one of your role-playing players, or perhaps your protagonist or one of their companions knows it, kind of tied to the explaining element. But especially if it's the main character, you can be like, I've heard of that. That was the people who did this, wasn't it? If it's the players, you can have had a discussion with them earlier on, and then when someone says, uh, have you heard of the Sunken City? Like, actually, I have. My father went there. That's the last time I remember hearing about them. I have their diary here. Whatever the case may be. Uh, if they know something, then they can be the ones to explain it. That way, if it's a player, they have the joy of being able to share it for you. Therefore, it's not just coming from you. The players are able to hear it from another source, then making it kind of more interesting from the get-go. And also, it gives them the opportunity to share in your joy. They're the ones explaining it, and you get to just bask in the glory of, yep, that's my stuff. They sharing it, or maybe it's their stuff, and it's dual incorporated. It's fun either way. uh, in a book, again, it can be just a quick thing. That's just how you introduce it to the reader of the protagonist. Like, I know this already. And just quickly think through it because people do that all the time. When you think of something, it's you you remember it. You think about why it's relevant to the situation. And kind of tied to all of these is the explaining over longer periods of time. This is kind of the uh, foreshadowing and uh, lead in type strategies where in the first scene you see a little bit of what's happening. In the second scene, you see a little bit more, third scene, etc. With a role playing game, it would be the things like you see the big bad evil guy in the beginning, or you hear about them, or you hear a little piece of lore here relevant to the situation. Like maybe you see a map that has the sunken city on it, or perhaps there is a hag that mentions something about, oh, if only I hadn't gone to the sunken city that day, I would have been able to do this. I don't know why they'd be cackling about that, but the the point is, if you can introduce it early and layer your information, give bits and pieces, by the time you come to the big reveal, there's just little bits that you give to fill in the gaps. Or you can even let the players fill in the gaps, um, where it can be the not mystery necessarily, it could be, but where you're just picking up bits and pieces. You learn about the politician who has been pulling all the strings, or the politician who's been the puppet for the person who's been pulling all the strings. You think it's this politician who's just this corrupt individual doing all this stuff, but it's really this other person who's been, think like the third Iron Man, where the Mandalorian is actually just an actor, and it's the uh, head of this other company that is the actual mastermind who has hired this individual to be a mask to present a need for his world-saving stuff and as a guise for the mistakes that have happened because of it. And there are some quick tips for you on how to present your story to your players, the lore and the world building. Let me know in the comments if this was a helpful set of tips for you. And if not, what do you think would have been more helpful? And also, let me know if there were any other tips that you think I missed that I should have mentioned about how to introduce lore to your players or readers. If you enjoyed this, please hit that like button and the subscribe button, and make sure you tap that notification bell so that you know immediately when I post a new video. I still don't have the buffer quite yet. Moving apparently takes a lot of time away from your ability to do other things. But getting it done, working on things. Um, I also want to thank my patrons, I keep doing this, on Patreon for supporting me and allowing me to do this sort of work. We still got more to discuss about lore, so make sure you check out next week's video. And until then, have fun.